Chemical Weapons Convention is a multilateral treaty that bans chemical weapons usage in warfare. Nearly all countries have signed on to the treaty. However, does it make sense to ever completely take a weapon off the table? Is there a difference in a nation employing such weaponry in an offensive or defensive war? When annihilation is a high probability, should we restrict our options? Or does even the existence of the option of chemical weapons pose such a significant physical and ethical risk that it must not be entertained? Okay, yeah. There's a whole list. There's a whole list of chemical weapons, and they do some nasty things. They do terrible things. But if a nation is facing, serious trouble, like what military commander would take an option off the table to save potentially the lives of its citizens, right? Against an invading nation, right? Like they're marching down into their capital. Does it make sense to restrict that? What if it was the states that's being invaded, right? What if somehow, like the British, stopped being useless and actually mounted a serious offensive? I don't know. Purely theoretical, not going to happen. A fantasy world, but if we had some worthwhile enemies, maybe they would use that on us, right? Or maybe we would use that on them if they came for us. So I'll give opening statements to all these people. Next, Mad Latin, since you're representing America, right? Defend us.
We would never use chemical weapons in any war, except for white phosphorus and depleted uranium. I guess that's not necessarily chemical, but no. So I'm gonna say my big brain shit for later. I've got some really interesting ideas that we can explore once we get into it. But generally speaking, my initial take here is going to be like pretty boring and obvious. I guess it's that we should not use chemical weapons. Generally speaking, the whole point of the chemical weapons ban is to keep countries from using weapons that are especially dangerous for civilian populations and soldiers. Like the walking wounded have a really hard time with this stuff. And it's not to say that countries won't do their own thing anyway, because countries will do their own thing anyway. If they're in a corner, they will obviously use like gas and whatever else. But the point is to kind of make it sort of a thing that only countries that are desperate will use, and that countries that have this flag here make it so that they are less likely to use it in regular operations.
Okay, thank you. Sneaky debate man representing the opposition. Please.
Pro-chemical weapon. No. It seems to me that like this is exactly the kind of thing the Geneva Convention was written up for, and like the thing you linked, Prime, like immediately mentions like the Geneva Protocols, right? In 1925, like the banning of like mustard gas and stuff like that, and getting rid of these like I can't remember what it's called. It's like excessively like harmful or something. It's not like harmful. It's like cruel and unusual. I think that's the phrasing it's used. And it seems to be that that's the case, because from what I've seen, it seems to be that it's not to kill most of the time. It's just to cripple, right? So, like for example, with like mustard gas, a lot of the time these people wouldn't like die immediately if they get hit by like mustard gas, right? What would happen is you die over the course of about 2 weeks, which means that's 2 weeks of food, that's 2 weeks of medical supplies, that's 2 weeks of blah blah blah. And obviously that's why it's very effective in World War II, because these resources are very limited. And like that is like cruel, right? Because you're not intending to kill these people. What you're trying is to limit resources by making these people as much of a burden as possible. And then you've got the other type of weapons, which I say like infectious diseases and stuff like that. So for example, like smallpox and things like that. So in one case, you're being like cruel and unusual to the soldiers. And in the other case, where you've got infectious diseases, the risk here tends to be with infecting civilian populations, which is again against the Geneva Convention, right? Targeting civilians and going after civilians is like deemed excessively cruel. And I understand, like Madlad said, countries are just going to do what they fucking want. right? They're just like, if they're backed into a corner, they're just going to do it. You can't be like, well, you have to follow the rules of war, because they're just going to do it, right? And the only thing that we can do is when you win, or hopefully if you win, you take him to The Hague. That's kind of all you've got, really. So like, we should probably not use them. It seems like being like that cruel is just kind of unnecessary, and targeting civilians is just kind of unnecessary. But this kind of logic falls flat because, it's war, right? These people are just going to do what they can to win. If this wins you the war, well, history is going to decide that you're the good guy in this situation, aren't you? So it seems a bit of an inconsistent position, but I guess there is a line here that we must draw.
Okay. Counterpoints.
Yeah, so to kind of flip this question on its head, it's like, when should these weapons be maintained? When should the technology be developed? And in what circumstances should they be used? So, I mean, obviously, people cited extreme defense, but I don't think there's been a war except for maybe like World War II, specifically with the Germans with ethnic cleansing, where people walked into... actually, you know what? I'm going to take that right back. Fuck. Most wars fought by civilized nations are not ethnic purges. I think in the event of an ethnic purge, if somebody was being ethnically purged, they could reserve the right to use disproportionate weapons like chemical weapons. That would be the only excuse that I think is morally permissible. And since that's so niche, and obviously it's like high technology and R&D, that's really the only reason why I think like modern developed nations should keep it, is for R&D and catastrophe. The only kind of catastrophes that I can think of is literally like alien invasion and reverse engineering bioterrorism. So no, I don't think like modern developed nations, especially anybody who's party to the UN or party to any like modern trade agreements, should be developing these weapons at all. They should be very limited to like R&D, specifically for those extreme cases that I cited before. So I'll leave it there, and then I'm happy to get into it in the general.
Top Dolphin.
Pro streamer.
Very pro streamer.
He's on top of it.
All right, I'm back. All right, we did the mute thing again. This is the first time in a couple of panels I've done it. But we're back on the old train. But yeah, I was gonna say, but I feel like everyone's already said what I said. But like, the point of like treaties like this is obviously not to like, you when it comes to warfare, you're never actually banning anything. You're making it harder for people to make the decision to use something. The same way we do for chemical weapons or nukes or bioterrorism. The idea is that like, if the treaty is enforced, then if the treaty is enforced, it's worse than the outcome had they just not used the weapon in the first place. Although I think there's some really interesting questions, like how likely are other members of a treaty to enforce said treaty, or like how bad is like the outcome if you don't use this type of weapon that could get really like kind of into the weeds. And I think that like necessarily it's kind of like with nukes, no one necessarily is going to take any option completely off the table. It's better to have them and not use them, but like just in case, you can pull them out of your back pocket if someone else starts breaking the rules, than to just be like, oh, we're just gonna like toss all the like chemical weapons aside and never use them, and then another country who breaks the rules fucks us. Like,
Let's go to Tiberius.
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of a different approach here, and I'm going to cover all three of the WMDs real quick because I think that's needs to be in scale. Number one, biological weapons. Don't ever use them. They will kill you more quickly than they'll kill the enemy. Pretty much no one will touch them unless you're insane. Nukes. Nukes are actually relatively cheap and incredibly easy to use, and I'm going to use this as a contrast to chemical weapons. The problem with nuclear weapons is that if you're going to try to hit a target with it, you're going to hit everything. And it's like it's literally like a firestorm that you hit on somebody. You're going to destroy literally anything and everything you touch. Remind you that the center, wherever it hits, literally evaporates. That's what nuclear weapons do. Chemical weapons are a different animal entirely. They are almost strictly offensive weapons. They are there to hit the infrastructure, but to preserve the infrastructure. And so whenever everyone's dead, you can roll right the hell in, and then you can take everything, and it's not all blown up because you used a nuke on it. The difference is they're incredibly expensive and they're way harder to use. That in a general nutshell. Do you want to use them is the question? Well, I don't believe in civilized warfare. But we are at least so far privileged that we haven't seen the total wars of the 20th century here in the 21st. But I'm running out of hope that we're not going to. And I'll leave it with there, and we'll get into that later in the open panel.
Revolt.
Chemical weapons bans, I think, are nearly impossible to enforce, and history shows that we're pretty bad about it. The United States, like, pretty flagrantly violates those rules all the time. We use things like white phosphorus, and, like, they have a very specific application, and it's not uncommon for them to be used in the wrong application. And like, obviously, like the downsides of having these rules is that, like, some people are going to show up with a hand tied behind their back unnecessarily. I think, like, the assurance of mutual destruction, I think, is probably a better, like, philosophy. I think everybody should have the deadliest weapons possible, and if we did, maybe we would have less wars. I just think it's kind of ridiculous to hold the technology back when we've got it. And the fact that somebody might be coming at you with VX gas and in a regular battlefield situation, I think would make a lot of people think about whether or not they want to be in a regular battlefield situation. So, yeah, I think limiting it is silly at this point.
Really? Thank you. All right. Juby.
Actually, agree with Revolt. I think that they should be researching these, and they should be researching anything they can to, if they're going to get into war, to end that war as quickly as possible, right? And if that means flooding the cave complexes of the Taliban with mustard gas, and that's what you do. I can't think of any reason we'd be okay with missiles and bullets that tear people to shreds. Leave them in pieces on the battlefield and still alive, still dragging themselves around. But we wouldn't be okay with, like, innovations. It just seems like a strange line to draw, and I don't really understand it. That's what I said.
Okay. Bam.
Yeah, generally speaking, like, I think we can make a moral argument that, like, chemical weapons shouldn't be used. But an analogy is kind of like if you ever been to a bar and, like, someone pulls out a gun in a bar, like, and everyone else pulls out their gun. So now the guns are out. You can tell everyone to put the guns up, and sure, that's fine. But, like, it doesn't matter now. The guns have been out. We know people have them, and basically all this treaty does, it's not even for the countries involved. It's mainly, like, an agreement between those countries that, hey, like, nobody else should have them, though, right? Like, we should be the only countries that have them, because if push comes to shove, they're like, like, no country's gonna hold back from doing so at the chance of, like, destruction. They're gonna do exactly what's necessary, and you wouldn't expect any less of anyone else.
Okay.
All right. So first things first, I really need to correct Tiberius on something. So Tiberius said that chemical weapons are used to preserve infrastructure so we can roll in. That is not the intention. Like, that was not the initial purpose of chemical weapons. Chemical weapons were developed during World War I, right? Like, were used specifically for World War I, where we're trying to, where armies are trying to clear out the trenches so they could charge ahead, and they're trying to break the stalemate. But it didn't actually necessarily do that. Now, if your infrastructure is trenches, I guess that's kind of an argument that sort of is what you were talking about.
Look,
but, like, you're not going to preserve facilities.
No. It's not 1914 anymore.
Okay, well, no, I'm just sorry. You're implying that the chemical weapons exist for this purpose.
Okay.
I wanted to go further. And hit you on the other point, which was that chemical weapons preserve infrastructure, and we can just roll in and start using that infrastructure. But I can assure you that a lot of chemical weapons leave residue in the places where they have been, and that residue makes a lot of this stuff inoperable. In fact, chemical weapons are used exclusively, a lot of the time, in the same way nukes are, to make an area unusable.
Yeah, but it's temporarily unusable. It's something like you can go and remediate it, and then you can build
we're
new
talking about years and months, not
no.
the next day, right?
Most of these chemical weapons that you are actually going to use aren't mustard gas, aren't chlorine gas. It's VX gas, sarin, shit like that. Yes, it kills the crap out of people, but more often than not, the serious side effects are gone within a week. What you are going to do if chemical weapons are ever going to be used again is that you are targeting a population center, or you're targeting a critical node of infrastructure. You want to kill everyone there, but you want to preserve it, because all you have to do is wait a week and you can roll in.
That would be the utility of using sarin gas. Yes, has sarin gas ever been used in warfare ever?
Yeah,
yes.
Saddam Hussein used it on the Kurds, right?
And we were pretty sure they used it. That's back in 1988.
I think
Oh,
actually though, the
I
fact
didn't
that
think that was the
a
case.
chemical weapon can preserve infrastructure surely is another point at why chemical weapons shouldn't be allowed, right? Because yes, it can preserve the infrastructure, which means it's a preferable alternative, right? Whereas if you have like say like a big bomb or something, right, you have to make the decision, right? If we hit this place with a bomb, we don't get to use any of the infrastructure here, right? Advancing into this position is going to be much more difficult. Whereas if you have a chemical weapon, you can just go, oh, we'll just kill all the people there, really easy, right? And thus it becomes more difficult to make that decision when chemical weapons aren't involved, right? Because there's a bigger cost to the person firing off the bomb.
I don't disagree with this. Is that on an ethical level? Is that if you want to make it to where people aren't going to use them, you want to kind of just use nukes, or you want to like use that as the last option? Chemical weapons, more or less, are just strictly an offensive weapon. You can't really use them in the defensive because you're going to hit your own people more likely than not. You're not going to want to do that. What you largely are wanting to do is you're wanting to target a specific group of people or a specific place, which I already iterated. So,
Right. So
like you
sarin
can take it
gas.
off, you can take it off the table. Don't get me wrong. You absolutely can, but I don't really believe in civilized warfare. I think sooner or later somebody's going to let this shit off the chain again.
Well, okay. So, like, talking about civilized warfare, I mean, I think that's like the first thing. Like, what do you mean you don't believe in civilized warfare? So you want to just like go nuts and go ham and just
No.
the weapons, or what?
Okay. So here's the thing. We are used to having wars that are relatively tame. If you look at things like Iraq, Afghanistan, even Vietnam, they are pale in comparison to the great catastrophes of the 21st century. That being the Great War of 1914-18 and World War II. What we saw then was entire countries mobilized, the imperial powers, the Great 12, mobilized against each other to the point where they were breaking each other on a geopolitical level. We haven't seen anything like that since the Cold War started. Now, we've seen proxy wars, we've seen some people get fucked over horribly, but actually a committed effort to destroy another country or bring it to your will, we haven't seen in the better part of 80 years. We've been very lucky. The question is, are we going to see that again?
Now, I just want to bring up one more thing, though, like referencing World War II.
Sure.
You're saying that, we're trying to break another country, et cetera, et cetera. But even during World War II, the Germans didn't end up using sarin gas against the Allies. Both sides produced and were prepared to use it, but they never uncorked the bottle, even though their countries are being destroyed. So why?
Because
the main reason why that most people speculate is that World War II was far more mobile and far more active than World War I was. World War I was very much trench warfare on the Western Front. You'll notice that in World War I on the Eastern Front, chemical weapons were barely used. They were used, but it was rare, and it was usually at the start of an offensive.
Well, the Eastern Front was kind of a joke anyway, to be fair. Like the Russians were doing a really bad job of operating their wars. What I'm saying, like they just half the time.
Okay, let's just take a collective shit on Russia. Why don't we? Okay,
I mean, fine, but they sucked. Like they did a really bad job of fighting World War I. That's why they had the revolution.
Can you go talk to Bad Buddy, please?
Okay, I mean, whatever. Like they sucked. It's fine. Whatever. We can talk about World War II.
Look,
like they had sarin gas. Germany was being destroyed. It was run by a madman, and they still didn't end up using the sarin gas. So, like, the question is why? Why wouldn't the Allies use the sarin gas to maintain Axis factories so they could produce ammunition locally and on site if sarin gas is such an easy thing to use, right?
No, I actually said specifically in my opening that it's not easy to use. It's not it's not like nuclear weapons where you can just tip something the size of me and throw it at somebody. It's a lot more complicated, and as stupid as that sounds.
Well, then artillery shells. They're launching. They prepared artillery shells with like little balls in them with the gas, and they're going to lob artillery at factories or whatnot, and they're going to gas regions, right? That would be the idea, and then you'd have a clear region that you can then use to, you could just run the factory, right? So, like, my question is, why didn't they do that when the two countries were trying to destroy each other outright?
Yeah. So you were right, but okay, World War I, you see a bunch of people put artillery canisters, right? They load it up full of gas and they shoot it. That's how they dispersed it. You can't do that on the front lines of a mobile battlefield. And if you're trying to use it against the civilian population, you have to have the artillery within range to do that.
So we could load it onto like B-52s and just bomb cities that.
Oh my God! Can I please?
Yeah, Connor.
Go ahead,
Connor.
Because this is the thing that gets a little frustrating when we start talking about warfare. There's this great quote by Karl von Clausewitz. I want everybody to contemplate it, but it's basic. No, it's absolutely true. Is that war is diplomacy by other means. So what'll happen in these conversations is basically we'll put a bunch of chess pieces on the board and we'll be like, how do we annihilate the other army as quickly as possible? That's not how war is fought. War is often like a spectrum of diplomatic goals, strategic goals, political goals, tactical goals, all that kind of stuff, all working together towards some stated end. And then oftentimes it's reduced down to like, it's reduced down to compromise that people can live with. So, for instance, my answer, while not necessarily being ready to back it up historically, is that probably part of the reason why we didn't see widespread use of chemical weapons the way that Tiberius is saying is probably partially technological, but also probably what's going on is a fuckload of people who were lower level officers and lower level infantrymen during World War I were probably senior staff by the time that they got to World War II. And they probably knew that shit was so fucking awful that they didn't want to open up that Pandora's box of fucking evil, nefarious shit. And one of the things, Ty, you can fucking go in a second.
No, you're right. This is funny. Go ahead.
But then there's also this this kind of calls in Doobie's question and kind of your perspective too, Tiberius, where you're saying like, total war is the way to go. We don't take things off of the shelf, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, there is a moral difference between somebody choking to death over 30 minutes versus getting shot in the head. There is a physical and pain and moral difference between choking somebody out with VX and putting like a 5.56 round in their head. So while it's not apparent to people on the outside, it is something that I consider. So I'll leave it there.
Right, and that's what, like, that's kind of like my point, right? Like, the whole idea here is that if you're willing to use chemical weapons and you're willing to really actually try to wreck these countries, not just in terms of like their manufacturing capacity, but actually wreck the populations, you're gonna have a hard time winning the aftermath, because that's exactly what warfare is. It's diplomacy by a different means. And if your diplomacy involves massively killing a mass of civilians that don't deserve it, then your end result is going to be a massive, a remaining civilization population that resents your state and will want to go to war with you again later. You're not going to have a peace.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody's here is advocating for like just bombing civilians or with chemical weapons. Like obviously.
Well, I mean, Tiberius was talking about the utility of it, and he was saying that we shouldn't have anything off the table. And I'm saying, well, what scenario can you imagine where chemical weapons would actually be worth using on the table?
I gave one earlier. Hold on. Wait, Tiberius, I'm sorry. Wait, hold on. Really quickly. I actually gave one earlier, right? So the Taliban are hiding in cave complexes all over the fucking all over Afghanistan. Seems a lot safer to flood those things with mustard gas and just send troops in there. Like, why wouldn't we just do that? Why should we take that off the table if it's useful?
Because now we have murder bots.
I mean, no, like, so all you're doing right now, Doobie, is like referencing our current enemy and treating them like they're somehow different from like the Germans of World War II. Like they're still our enemy. And we still, I mean, they're different in terms of who they were, right? I get that on every level, fine, but they were still like enemy of our state.
Sure.
And like it's still like this idea of, are we going to go down to this ethical, moral level to win this war? Like it's still kind of,
and also up, right? Well, and also, Mad Latin, this is an interesting thing, because when you're willing to so terrorists are willing to use indiscriminate means to kill people, but they also have to use like some level of optics. Suicide bombing is not the best optics. But if you're willing to use like sarin gas in a cave complex to gas out a bunch of Taliban fighters, then they're going to say, oh, well, we're just using the tool of the enemies against them when we release sarin gas in a subway system in New York or a subway system in Tokyo.
But they absolutely would do that. And they've tried to.
They already have.
This isn't off the table for them. Why should it be off the table for us?
And not just that, but it's the psychological effect. It's like most of the warfare.
They already have. Are you? Wait, I'm sorry. When did Al Qaeda release sarin gas?
1995 in Tokyo. Like that's like
that is not the same organization.
We're not.
Oh, okay. No.
I'm just saying, like,
I mean terrorists broadly, obviously, but like
okay, fine. So you're gonna group all these different enemies.
That was another civilization.
Okay. Fine, but like no, they're like the whole point.
Right.
This is not
whose name was followed by the word mujahideen. So like,
well, I mean, whatever. Like my point here is that if a terrorist organization is not initially starting the use of chemical weapons, and it's not like sarin gas is hard to produce, right? Like it's actually relatively easy. It's been made since 1939. The fact, like the chemical compound is like
Mustard
not
gas
that
is
hard.
even easier.
Right.
You can make it
Yeah,
stuff
right.
on the
They
kitchen
have not used something that's very easy to produce against Western civilization, which implies very strongly that there is some sort of precedent that's not being crossed. That's all. Like
Wait, hold on.
it
So,
doesn't make
so you
sense.
tell me that, the guys
I mean-
who like slaughter civilians by the dozens, right? You're saying they haven't
because the
used
United
any ethical
States hasn't
license-
accidentally
because they haven't
civilians.
Hold
used
on, let him say it because
they
I want to
haven't-
respond.
because they haven't used mustard gas yet. It's all, it should be off the table for us. Right? Like that, why do we need to wait for them to use
We're
this
in-
thing that we could have
Because
access
they're
to?
not going
Can I-
to.
That
Oh,
could
go
end
ahead.
the fight-
Sorry.
that could end the fight before they can even get to the pipe where they can use this stuff.
Can I just
Yeah,
point out that
can
we're
I-
in Iraq and Syria right now because they had chemical weapons and allegedly used them, right?
Connor.
Yeah, I just allegedly used.
I want to hear what Counterpoints has to say. Hold on. Let's.
Yeah, so it's interesting because RevoltRise kind of brought up a point that I think is tangential. Violence is reciprocal. So once you open up something, that you can do to somebody, then it means that morally it can be done to you. Especially if you're talking about the struggle between nation states, and in particular if you're talking about the struggle between like non-state actors and the state. If the state starts doing all this stuff, like, and also I understand this from like a theoretical or philosophical perspective. Appealing to pragmatics for a second, we did invade a country under the moral assumption that they had used weapons of mass destruction in the past. So if we're using weapons of mass destruction routinely in our warfare against our enemies, then why wouldn't China literally next day be like, hey, these fucking assholes literally went to war over weapons of mass destruction 20 years ago. Now they're using it routinely to kill terrorists. They make a mockery of the morality that they purport to hold every single fucking day. So fuck these motherfuckers. We should be the global hegemony. And despite our dictatorial authoritarian bullshit, we are the lesser of two evils. And in that scenario, I think they would be correct.
I
Yeah,
think
I
also
think
think
they
there's
could
like
become-
more to war than specifically like I don't believe in ethical warfare to begin with. Like I also kind of agree with that, but like I also think there's more to war than efficiency. Like it's not just like how can we wipe out as many people as possible in as quick of a time. Like there are other calculations that go into like the equation.
Not that there were very many calculations being applied in Afghanistan. Like there were some things we did very, very wrong there, obviously. But sorry.
I would point out too that the capabilities of chemical weapons I think are being like vastly overstated too. Like the reason why we don't use them largely is because when the wind shifts, like you'll get yourself when you drop them. You know what I mean? Like it's a very sensitive tool that has very limited application, and in the real world they're very ineffective. And they're also like dilution. Like over time they say things like 1 drop of VX gas, and it's like sure 1 drop of VX gas if you like inject it into your veins like will cause that. Like if you absorb it like through tissue, it won't do that much damage at all. And over 15 minutes in the open air in a room, it'll be hardly lethal. You know what I mean? And it's like,
and finally, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so like we shouldn't like assume that like it's not like a magic weapon that's gonna just like you just drop it and it just kills everybody. Like most of the time, it doesn't work.
And I mean, I'm gonna just add on that, like, you have no guarantee that using the chemical weapons on Tora Bora at that time would have actually done anything.
Well, but that's kind of the horror of opening up this can of worms or whatever, is basically like if we had done that, there are very specific applications that I could deem like particularly nefarious. So, for instance, I think the reason why the Sarin attack was targeted at the subway is because they knew that it was poorly ventilated. They knew that it was highly dense. They knew that they would be able to hit it in such a way that they would have like maximum effectiveness. And I do think they killed a few dozen people with their
that many people actually. They weren't able to get into a mist. The analysis is that like it stayed droplet form and only killed like 13 people.
8.
Right, but still, like again, like when we're talking about like war being diplomacy by other means, if you're trying to get attention for your movement, 13 people, right, is like a drop in the bucket. Like people get machine gunned every single day. 13 people die every single day. We don't take a second look at it. But when you're talking about like super cities like Tokyo or New York, where you ride the subway every single day, thinking that like, oh my God, one of my neighbors could literally just emit random gas and kill dozens of people around them, and I would have no way to defend myself against it, that's going to have a very chilling and terrifying psychological effect on the populace, particularly if it's routine. And that's one of the things that I don't like about Doobie saying like, hey, it should just be routine because if you're our enemies, fuck you, is because when you open this up, like, okay, so now we're going to make it routine for, basically chemical weapons attacks to be reprisals against United States civilians. Like, I'm good.
We don't want that. We don't want that.
Yeah, suicide bombing and truck attacks are already bad enough. I don't think I want VX.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that this is a line, like an ethical line for jihadists and shit, right?
Well, no, because they haven't crossed it yet.
Wait, hold on, but they've crossed the line of like slaughtering civilians in clubs and shit.
Okay, but
and
they still
like,
haven't
cutting
used the
people's
chemical
heads off in the
weapons.
street. Wait, okay, but so why do we need to wait for them to cross that line?
Because we don't
Okay,
want
what
it.
evidence
It's
is
worse
there?
for.
Hold on,
Okay, I'll tell you what.
Wait. What evidence is there?
Motherfucker.
And the reason they haven't crossed this line is because they don't have. It's because they just. It's an ethical reason, and it's not that they don't have like access to this thing. Right? Maybe they don't know how to make this shit. Maybe it's more difficult to make.
Okay, so we're just gonna come up with like random bullshit for why they haven't used.
You're
it.
telling me it's an ethical line. Tell me why.
Okay,
you think
all right,
it's
hold on. Let me. All right, I'm gonna break this down. Okay, I've got a real life example that will help clear this up. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
I was in the woods doing airsoft, right? And a bunch of my comrades had firecrackers, okay? Right? And my team was getting their ass kicked because our guy had no idea what the fuck they were doing. So it was me and two guys holed up in this little cabin thing. And one of my asshole comrades lit a firecracker and threw it outside and exploded and nobody was impacted, okay? And then all the assholes that were outside lit their firecrackers and they threw it in the little cabin thing that I was hiding in, okay? And we got fucked, okay? It sucked. That is the type of scenario we're talking about, where we'll throw gas, we can spend millions of dollars. Instead of using a Tomahawk missile to blow up a tent, we can gas the tent instead. Great. And then we've got motherfuckers who are going to come at us with gas attacks on our infrastructure that's dense and actually expensive. That's the fucking point. Like, it's straight up a stupid idea.
So you're telling me that a bomb that not only kills these people, but then destroys the infrastructure and makes the lives difficult, not just for the enemy, but for the civilian population there.
It's a fucking tent.
This is okay. This is the analogy use, right? So you're telling me this is preferable to a chemical weapon that would not only kill these guys, right? But then you might save the infrastructure. So after you decontaminate the shit, you can still use it. The civilian population isn't affected by that.
We can go fucking camping now.
And further, you're telling me that you believe, for some crazy ass reason, that these people have an ethical line against using chemical weapons. With no evidence.
Weapons.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. In your analogy, they had the fireworks already. Like, are you saying the terrorists have these things and they're just waiting for us?
Well, I mean, allegedly, Iraq was loaded with chemical weapons. So when we invaded, ISIS should have been able to get their hands on them. I don't know. I mean, whatever, shit argument. But like, also before I don't want to forget this. This is important. I corrected you, Revolt, and I said 8. I apologize. There were 2 incidents with sarin gas. They did a test run, and then they did it in the Tokyo subway. The Tokyo subway was 12 people killed. All right. Okay. Sorry, continue. Counterpoints, whatever.
So, Madela, given that ISIS allegedly did use chemical weapons, would it be okay to have used chemical weapons against them?
I'm going to let Counterpoints respond real quick because I feel like he has a very strong point he wants to make.
Counterpoints and also Sneaker Bateman. Go ahead. And Tiberius.
Yeah. And then, that question is actually really interesting to me because we do take these moral considerations into account all the time. Like, I know we're all on like Twitter or Twitch.tv. So like, the stereotype is that just like US soldiers wake up, drink their coffee, and then just go like execute small brown children for fun, like every single day. And that's like the stereotype of what the United States military does, but that's not what it does. And basically, like when it came to Iraq in particular, I can tell you like Haditha Dam, it provides like the hydroelectric power for all of Al Anbar. And instead of hitting it with a fucking cruise missile or whatever, we sent in troops specifically to physically take it and hold it and safeguard it. That way, basically Saddam loyalists and that way insurgents or terrorists didn't blow up the dam and then like lose power for an entire region that's reliant on it for agriculture. So we don't really do this like nation versus nation, destroy everything, glass the entire country kind of warfare anymore. And we do make these moral judgments about spectrum of violence all the time in the hopes of getting people to be like our cohorts and allies. Again, like this is incredibly like, I know I'm in an unnuanced place on Twitter or Twitch, But basically, like when we're talking about the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan, the reason why we had allies in the first place, like the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police and the Iraqi Army and the Iraqi Police, even if they were fair weather allies or even if they were like shitty allies or whatever, the reason why we had those people is because we weren't fucking dropping Sarin left, right, and center. We weren't fucking dropping VX left, right, and center. We weren't glassing cities. We weren't fucking slaughtering entire towns of fucking people. So that's where it's like this moral difference, it matters. It matters to the people that we're talking about. It matters how we conduct counterterrorism. And on top of that, it can be incredibly counterproductive. If we went into Iraq and Afghanistan and we were just glassing cities left, right, and center, number one, popular support at home would be fucking zero. Number two, popular support worldwide would be fucking zero. So I don't know what the fuck we're talking about with this like total war bullshit that we haven't done since, I don't know, the early 20th century.
Let's go to Spoon, Ty, then Top Dolphin, and Revolt.
I think it seems to be the main issue here that like chemical weapons, they have like no drawbacks for the user, right? And that incentivizes the use of them, right? Like Trona says, do we actually want to be killing people in this way? Like optically, it looks horrible, and like even if it's not the most effective, it doesn't really matter, right? Like let's say we like launch a fucking like sarin canister, like this down a mine or something like that, and it's like really ineffective, doesn't kill them. So what? Send another one in, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Oh, it didn't work. None of them worked. Just a bunch of like dudes choking out in there, like almost dying. Oh well, no, all right. Now we're gonna blow it up, right? Like there's no like all we're doing is opening a Pandora's box. I think that's a very good way of putting it here. I think Doobie, your point of like, oh well, they don't have this ethical boundary to cross. They would do it if they had the opportunity. No, I don't think they would, right? Because I think they know that if they do it and we do it in return, they're gonna get it a lot worse. Right, they're gonna get it a lot worse. Like if they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna go over and kill a bunch of them with like some poison or whatever, like, and then we start fucking like bombing them with a bunch of mustard gas and whatever. Like I think they're gonna be the ones regretting it and not us, right? Like if like to invoke the fury of a much more developed nation, I think is really stupid. I really into that. So it seems that the positive of chemical warfare actually become the greatest points against it. The fact that it's like easy to use and it might not be effective. Actually, this means that it's worse. I mean, that makes it worse. We definitely shouldn't be using it, right? The fact that you can keep infrastructure, the fact that it might not kill them, it doesn't really matter if it does or not. I mean, just send another one, send a bomb, doesn't matter. That makes it worse. That makes it more incentivized to use. That means warfare escalates to this scale. And I would even say in the case that, well, we get attacked first with like some sort of like horrible thing, like, we get bombed, we get blah, 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 we get poisoned. We're going to have to turn the other cheek to that, right? Because if we normalize this kind of thing, if we allow that kind of thing to proliferate, you're escalating. And once you escalate, like,
the research and development, right?
Exactly.
Like the research and development will make it worse.
We escalate, they escalate, we escalate, they escalate, and it goes from like shooting each other in the head to your skin and you burning alive for like 2 months before you die.
It gets worse than that because it goes from like sarin gas, where like it dissipates after a short period of time and we're fine, to chemicals that just don't dissipate and you have like a wasteland. And there's like plenty of chemical wastelands throughout the United States. They're Superfund, I think it's like Superfund toxic sites that exist, where like chemical companies just kind of dump their shit in the environment, and now you can't use that land until it's cleaned up. Like, just imagine some sort of chemical attack that actually ruins a location for a permanent period of time.
Like, you mean like a third of Vietnam covered in Agent Orange still?
Yeah, like that shit. Exactly.
Is that what we want? Do we want escalating warfare? Do we want to go, well, you've done us dirty, so let's do you dirtier? Right? Because that, like, this eye for an eye mentality will not just get you killed, but get you killed in more and more unpleasant ways.
But I mean, that's the name of war, right? Like that's the whole thing. Is like is to increase the number of people that each soldier kills is like what the best military.
That's different, right? Killing people efficiently and killing as many and like getting the war over as quickly as possible is very different to getting killed gratuitously.
Right.
Well, let's go.
And on top of that, I would say,
we gotta go Ty, and then
fine.
We'll let Ty top dolphin.
Fine.
Yeah.
So,
Ty
sorry.
first.
Go ahead.
okay, yeah. So like, I don't. I'm
Dolphin, you say Tiberius.
Oh, wait,
I heard top, so I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure you said top dolphin. Okay.
Said Ty.
All right. I
Go
can't
ahead,
hear.
Dolphin.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dolphin. I'll get after you.
All right. I would say, as I kind of don't like the framing of this as like moral grandstanding necessarily, right? It's like, oh well, we have the moral responsibility to not do it, and because of that, they're not doing it. I kind of agree with Doobie that like we shouldn't have like necessarily moral limits, but like we have quote unquote moral limits in insofar as like our allies and enemies like observe them, right? So like there are like obviously if we went and dropped a nuke right now, there'd be a lot of people on the planet really fucking mad at us. And that's one, and that quote unquote moral pressure is a pressure that that stops us from dropping nukes. In the same way that if we want to use something like chemical weapons, sure, they might be really efficient and really effective at eliminating enemies or solving that problem. But when it comes to creating allies, when it comes to like getting your enemies to a reasonable position in which they will like in which they will like negotiate with you to end the war, because that's usually the goal of war, is to end it. Like these aren't always things that are very effective, and things like treaties make it more effective to like dissuade people from using these types of things.
I think you'd be less inclined to sign a treaty as well if you didn't just kill their soldiers, but you killed them in a really grim way. You know, it's not like you just came up and like you just they blew up and they died instantly. No. We watched these men like bleed out and choke to death over the course of 2 months. I think they're going to be much less likely to sign a treaty.
Yeah,
like,
fear is
that
powerful tool of persuasion. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Have you
good.
seen the Hellfire missile with swords on it though?
Okay, I've got two things left because between Spoon and counterpoints, you guys hit most of my points. Three things. Number one, I don't expect that if WMDs are used, whether it's nukes, what have you, in any kind of relative scale, it's not going to be on a civilian level or on a basically, if you will, a terrorism level. There will be a little of it here and there, but it's really hard to do these things. What you're probably going to see is that if these weapons are ever used in war ever again, it will be state-on-state actors. It's going to be somebody who is either desperate or they have a strategic target that they have to take out in a specific way that they'll use these kind of weapons. I want to get to Doobie and Revolt because I'm actually on Connor's side with this one. Is that, do you guys believe in the principle of excessive force in any way?
Not in war.
Yeah, I do.
Could you explain the
think in
principle?
Okay, so the principle of excessive force is basically, just, hey, I can use force to counteract your force. And most people will be like, hey, there's an equality there, there's an equity there, it's reasonable. But if you go past that point where you're basically, trying to take out an anthill with a fucking machine gun or some shit like that, which would be stupid.
It should be pretty awesome, man. It sounds pretty badass, but go ahead.
But
We
the whole
lost
point,
them, Ty. We lost them.
yeah, I know. Anyway, the whole point here is like, all right, cool. You don't want to take out an anthill with a stick of dynamite, right? Because that's excessive force, and everyone's going to look at you like a crazed lunatic or an idiot. That's it in a nutshell. Is that if you do something that is unreasonable or unwarranted, people have an ethical concern to blow back against you. And it's not that I don't respect where Revolt is, where it's just like, hey, when war's on, war's on. Take your hands off the table. But in reality, we humans believe that there are rules in war, and that's an ethical conversation that gets fucking weird as shit.
Actually want to build on
I'm not
Tiberius'
actually a-
point and actually just really small, like really tiny, because like Tiberius made a really good point about excessive force, but it's not just that like we're gonna make rules because excessive force makes us look stupid. It's that we aren't invincible enough to use excessive force and then withstand the blowback. That's the point. Like if we use excessive force to do something, then everybody's gonna sharpen their knives for us as a response.
Let's go to Revolt,
Yeah.
Bam, and then Connor.
I can actually wait for Top. I'm sorry.
Top off. No, I did.
Oh, did he win?
Yeah, I went.
So we'll go,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Revolt, Bam, and then Connor. Go ahead, Revolt.
Increasing the amount of technology and the effectiveness of chemical weapons like increases our soft power too, like in ways that can possibly help avoid war. That's something that I wanted to bring up. And, like we were talking about not using nukes. Like the biggest advantage that you get from having nuclear weapons, right, is the threat of using them, right? And so like you can actually use that for significant amounts of like in dealing with foreign policy and foreign relations. Like if we have a threat of using this like new chemical weapon that could possibly destroy an entire city overnight, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing is there's a lot of power in now not using it. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think that we should like get rid of the restraints. The other thing is that like the United States will never be held accountable for when it uses them, and like its enemies, like our enemies have done the same things. Like we know for a fact that like there's video of Russia using white phosphorus bombs over Syria, like just like currently to this day. Like the United States, same thing over Iraq and Afghanistan. Like those things they're not chemicals in the way that we're thinking about here, but they're like obviously they're illegal and they're a chemical weapon. And like, so I think that like, you know, the disproportionate application of any kind of law that we would come up with to regulate these things is going to be like abused and is problematic in its own way. The other thing that I would say is that like, again, like as far as like dropping chemicals on a town and like hoping that it kills everybody, it simply just doesn't work that way. They're not that effective. And like they don't talk about this much because like they would ruin, you know, the soft power that we get from not, you know, the threat of not using them, or the threat of using them. Like the facts are is that like they just don't always work, and there's a really good chance that they're going to blow back on your own guys. Modern wars are not fought in the way that like they used to be fought, where you'd have a bunch of guys in red uniforms and blue uniforms and they'd line up and face each other and then fire at each other. Like that doesn't happen.
Halo says differently. Okay, you're clearly wrong. All right.
Whatever. Okay, like this, the only thing worse than shatters is gamers. Okay, like you guys are like, but like besides that point, like it's just almost impossible to use these chemical weapons when you don't have that delineation of left and right and good and bad and whatever, you know what I mean? So it's like when you have this like, you know, modern warfare type situation that's going to be mostly you know, combat in cities and like in densely populated areas, you're not going to have a battle line, you know.
Let's go to Bam, then Connor.
Yeah, I actually like I kind of agree with Matt Ladd. It's not specific. Like the reason we don't is more so about like soul preservation. Like just because like all of these countries have allies. Like if there was some tiny little standalone nation with no like major power allies with any like chemical or nuclear capabilities, like I can't say full stop that the United States wouldn't find it like in the better interest to just like wipe them out completely, knowing that there would be no like blowback from it. But because everyone's allied with somebody bigger than them, like it's just not in the interest of doing so. And because I'm not a soldier, I can't speak in war terms. I can only speak in analogies. I compare it to I compare it to like there's not really rules of war, but there's like if you get in a fist fight, like you can't talk it out. There's no guarantees, but there's an expectation that this is going to be a fist fight. Like even if you have a knife in your back pocket, you don't necessarily want to pull it out because you have no idea what they have in their back pocket, which could be worse. And you don't want to be seen as a pussy at the end of the day. Like like there's an expectation. Like you don't want to get punched in the face, but like you can accept like, oh, okay, I'll get punched in the face, but I don't want to get stabbed or shot. So like I think that's the bigger reason why we don't make these calls.
Yeah, and so I think I'll give y'all plenty of fuel for the fire, basically. So Doobie, I guess my main concern is the normalization of use of chemical weapons. So the reason why I wouldn't want to see these used casually is because I think it would normalize it for nation states to say, fuck it, death is death, and then they would use that. Like so, for instance, like Syria doing the barrel bombs and also doing the alleged chemical attacks that they've done. It does matter to the individual whether or not they get blown up or shot, or whether or not they get choked to death over the period of 2 weeks. So I'm not trying to open up the can of worms for that fate to be more widely accessible to humanity. And then this is one of the parallel hypotheticals that I want people to consider. If a non-state actor, if a terrorist organization set off like a dirty bomb in an American city, are we going to turn around and like nuke a random city in the Middle East or North Africa or in like the Philippines where this terrorist organization came from? No, like we wouldn't. So just because an external threat is using a method of violence that we don't deem appropriate, doesn't mean that we start doing it. The jihadists, they like beheaded people with a bunch of fucking butter knives. Did we take people out in Guantanamo Bay and put them on fucking live stream and start chopping their heads off? No, we didn't. So basically, one of the things that I wanted to address was the sword missile. RevoltRise kind of mentioned this passingly, but I think it's like an interesting thought experiment that Prime actually answered honestly a few weeks back, where a sword missile, basically the United States government has created a non-explosive missile that literally shoots blades. So it's a missile that will hit a truck or hit a person, and it shoots blades and it chops them to pieces without a secondary payload, without an explosive. And what it does is it minimizes casualties. And I was kind of asking Prime, it's like, that's so psychologically fucking horrifying, and murder bots is so psychologically horrifying. Is this actually a preferable alternative to a Hellfire missile? And he was like, fuck yes, less people killed. And I was like, all right, like as long as we're able to bite that like moral bullet, then I think Revolt was pointing at the moral horror of being able to assassinate random people without secondary consequences, minimizing or maximizing our ability to use that threat. But at the same time, if it is less people killed on the global stage, that's probably a good thing. Final 2 points. Basically, Revolt mentioned the use of soft power. I think that is the one legitimate thing that comes out of weapons of mass destruction production. The reason why we haven't invaded North Korea is because they probably have nukes. The reason why we haven't invaded North Korea is because they probably have weapons of mass destruction and they're just maybe crazy enough to fucking use them. And then Tiberius, this rolls right into my second question. Do you see the future? Do you see a future of national level wars? Because
Yes.
I don't. I don't. How do you have national level wars in a world filled with nukes?
Okay, so I was up next anyway. So I was going to let Connor take the tactical side. I was going to go against my arch enemy Revolt and the strategic side because I'm not a big fan of not WMDs, mutually assured destruction. I think it's actually a bit of a flawed concept. I don't think it's completely without merit. I'm not trying to say you're just wrong. I think you have a point. The problem is that if you look at almost everything that we've ever invented in war, we've used it, at least in some limited capacity. Now, since Cold War started, we haven't fired off the big nukes. We haven't used thermo nukes yet, and we haven't used like VX on somebody.
And we haven't seen the rods from God yet either.
Well, rods from God turned out to be a bit of a nothing burger. So, well, that's a conversation for later. Anyway, the problem that I have here is that the number one reason I firmly believe that the world hasn't gone to war yet is not actually mutually assured destruction. It is that we've had global order on a level that we haven't seen before. And what I mean by that is if you look at the world pre-1945, it's at least 8 imperial powers, if not more, constantly vying and struggling for global supremacy. After 1945...
And that wasn't the Cold War? What?
Shut up for a minute. I'm not done, cunt. Anyway, 2 things. 1, Cold War brought it down to 2, the United States and the Soviet Union, and they called the shots across the board. And what it evolved into is that it wasn't just war. It was everything. It was economically. It was politically. It was the biggest geopolitical global struggle, and every tool was on the table. And then after 1991, it's down to 1. The United States calls the shots for everybody. And while you may say China's doing its own thing here, Russia's doing its own thing here, or India's doing its own thing here, the United States basically maintains a world order. But since 1991, the United States has been slowly walking away because we built the order to oppose the Soviets. And unless we repurpose it against China, whether it's a bad hair day of a second Donald Trump term or a decade of neglect, I guarantee you that the Americans aren't going to keep this going. And when that is over, you're going to see the French and the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese and the Chinese figuring out things on their own. And they do not have a record of brotherly love and cooperation. They have a history of war on a colossal scale.
Let's go to Sneak the Bitman.
I think I'm thoroughly on team. It does matter how people die. I like Prime. You said you answered this hypothetical of like, yeah, it's better because less people die. Obviously, that's like obviously less people dying is a good thing, right? But like, I think you do have to be considerate of the way people die. So, for example, would you rather one person gets tortured to death or 2 people die but they never even see it coming, right? Like a fucking sniper round hits them in the back of the head, they never even see it coming, right? Like, I think the choice here of like 2 people die but they never see it coming, or 1 person gets tortured to death over 2 weeks, like, I think I know which option we're choosing, right? Especially when it comes to our enemies.
Unless you ask that other person,
right? Exactly. And I think again, like this idea of like, well, what would I want, right? If I were in that position, what would I want? Would I want to die just never seeing it coming? 50 caliber round just like obliterates my skull from a mile away, or I die in a hospital bed, coughing up my lungs in complete isolation for 2 weeks, right? That sounds terrible. I think I'd much rather die to the barrel of 50 cal round, right?
See, and that kind
So
of
it definitely
is how your army keeps losing.
it definitely does matter how the person dies. And I think like when you're making that choice, or even being the one to receive that choice, you would want that courtesy, or you should make that courtesy.
Alright, go ahead, Madeline. I'm bursting at the seams.
All right, I just want to shit on Tiberius's point just real quick. When he was saying that, like, we got to the 2 world powers and that order prevented, like, all this warfare and stuff. Yeah, the order were the nukes. That whole thing that Revolt was talking about. So
No,
like,
yeah, kiss my ass, dude. Like, here's the thing. If you look after 1945, global prosperity literally improves by a factor of 10. Even during the Cold War, where everybody's arming up for the biggest colossal conflict in human history, having everybody on the same side, or at least on two sides, allowed people who had been previously disadvantaged and who had previously not been able to access capital, raw materials, and resources, allow that.
it's amazing that there's two sides, because the two sides were the folks with the nukes, and then everybody just kind of coalesced around the folks with the nukes.
That is kind of true. And also, I'd point out that what you're saying is that government spending is good.
No,
Yeah.
what I know, I'm actually.
Or maybe the lack of warfare. You know, since there weren't
No,
actual,
no.
like, you know, big
Shut
nation
up,
destroying
dude.
wars, the
Goddamn.
economy could just build up. I don't know.
Hey, look, if you want to debate, bro, go fucking talk to Destiny, dude. Fuck off with this shit. Okay? Now, the second thing here that I will get in is that actually I'm going to take a RevoltRise talking point here. The reason why we have seen less wars is because people have actually had a massive increase in the standard of living, both domestically in government, but also geopolitically. Is that tying yourself to the Americans, even though they be annoying as fuck, is that the Germans didn't have to worry about getting oil, getting steel, getting raw materials from the rest of the world, where they had to launch wars of imperialism to take it. Now it's all in one network. You can buy it from somebody and you never have to fight them for it. And it's protected by the good old USN. It's a wonderful deal for almost anybody who has actually had to fight to get resources, which is most of the imperial powers. It's just a win-win.
I mean, I'm in favor of the global hegemony, just generally because of the fact that, because of the fact there's a lot of countries that probably would have had conflicts that can't have conflicts because, like, there's a larger power over them that says that, like, I have an interest in both of these countries and you guys are gonna have to work this out some other way. Like,
I have an interest in nukes. Cough, cough, hint, hint.
Yeah, probably having nukes. Honestly, that's the only point I agree with RevoltRise. Having nukes unironically does prevent some level of warfare, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, and as I said initially, I don't think it's entirely without merit that nukes don't, discourage warfare. Definitely, but I think the number one thing here, and I'll even say it was the leftist talking point, is that having material conditions met for most of your civilians and you don't have to fight for it is just a win for most nations. Then they'll take some level of subserviency to the United States or even to the Soviets to get that, and they did.
Yeah.
Damn, I floored it.
I mean, I'm trying to. I wouldn't want to argue against the leftist talking point.
I mean,
but
yeah, Tiberius is going to argue for it.
I mean,
like,
like I've got this conflict. Like, do I want to? But I mean, really though, like, how could we have all this material wealth? How can we have a situation where we're sourcing the materials we need to build a better economy without, like, resorting to warfare? Well, the warfare would have to be so dangerous and so destructive that it's not worth doing. So again, I don't see how your argument challenges the fact that the nukes prevented the wars.
Because wars are almost always a net loss for people in the actual calculus.
Well, the point is that when people engage in wars, they think they're going to win, so they don't actually consider the net loss, right? They think, oh, well, we're going to win, and then we're going to get whatever resource we want. That's
this
the point.
might actually back your point in some way, but I'll take it, is that 70% of the people who launch the war wins it.
Okay.
So usually people launch a war because they think it's actually going to be within their national interest to do that, and that's why they usually launch one. The thing is that you are correct that it is significantly different. But my thing here is that now we have entered an era where people don't have to launch the wars, because the things that they would launch the war for is looking for prosperity, and we have had a massive increase in world prosperity because the Americans run the show, and it's.
I mean, the flag is really nice, and I want to agree with that on some level, but like, I think like the technological advancement that gave us prosperity is also the technological advancement that made warfare so dangerous that we are kind of shying away from it. And I think I think it's both. I'm willing to say it's both. I just think that we're definitely undercutting the nukes. Like, the nukes are a big deal.
Look, I'll compromise and say it definitely is both to some level here. But think about this. Every time we had a new deadly ass fucking thing that people were worried about, they're like, oh, well, we can't possibly use this. People said this about the machine gun back in 1900, but then we used it on a colossal scale. Then it was chemical gas. Then actually it was nukes. Truman was scared shitless about dropping the nukes in Japan. But he said, you know what? I'm not taking 1 million Allied casualties to defeat Japan. I'm dropping it. So sooner or later, you are going to find somebody who is too goddamn desperate or too goddamn scared that they're not going to want to use one.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I agree with that in a principle. Like, eventually, we will have someone who will use a weapon they shouldn't to cause great harm. I do believe that. Like, I think biological warfare is a thing we're gonna have to deal with one day.
But Tiberius, I have a question because basically when I asked you whether or not you thought that like national level warfare was going to be a thing or not, what I mean, like even with the examples that you use, like France, Germany, Spain, whatever, acting within their interest. If we were talking about like proxy wars or small scale anti guerrilla wars in like Africa or North Africa or some shit like that, I totally agree with you. But if we were talking about like India or China going blow to blow, or the United States or China going blow to blow, or something like that. The reason why I don't see that happening is because like when the machine gun came out, you could kill 1,000 people in fucking 3 seconds. When you're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles with fucking nuke tips or whatever, you're talking about cities. Yeah. Like you're also talking about like almost like an extinction level event for all of humanity, especially if both sides fire. So that's where, for me, it's like nuclear armed powers going to war over territory doesn't seem realistic to me anymore. What I do think is possible, though, because I think this is already happening, is basically like special forces and proxy wars, basically using like non-state actors like militias and terrorist groups and all that kind of stuff as proxies for like material wars in destabilized nations. So whether or not we were talking about like Yemen or countries in like West Africa, like Ivory Coast or something like that, or Mali, I could see like American or Chinese special forces teaming up with like like high tech stuff to fight material wars in countries that aren't able to stand up on their own. But countries that can stand up on their own that do have nukes, I just don't see it.
Yeah. So 2 things here to kind of back your point up and then tear it down. The first thing is that most of the wars that we've seen since 1945 have actually come under the war or under the auspice of civil. That is more over a civil war that is between factions within a locality, and sometimes you have a foreign actor help them out. But most of the time, it has that core root. And so that actually kind of backs you up a little bit. Here's what I think is going to happen that's changing. One example right now, and Revolt can 100% back me on this, is that India and China have a massive increase in tensions right now. And the reason why is that China is damming the watershed or the river watersheds in Tibet that basically supply the Ganges. If they shut that down, that is absolutely a Cassius belly, and you will throw nukes over that because you're shutting off your water supply to somebody.
70% of the water to India, the fresh water that they use for drinking, comes from originates in China, right?
Yeah, in the Tibet region of China. And we're also getting ready, another hotbed that we're looking at is obviously the Blue Nile in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been building one of the biggest dams in the world. I don't blame Ethiopia for doing it. It's supposed to supply like 80% of their power. But on the other side of that is that is a geopolitical threat to not only Sudan, but also this country called Egypt. And Egypt has obviously shown that they're one of the nations that will absolutely go to war if they feel like they have to.
Okay, but that kind of like begs the question though. So like, is China dumb enough, or are they ballsy enough to fuck with the water supply to the point without negotiation that it actually launches a war, or are they going to back down where they say, hey, India has 1.2 billion, we got 1.2 billion, they got nukes, we got nukes. If I fuck over these people too hard, they're gonna burn a couple of my cities. So like, are they that fucking stupid, and are they that ballsy?
Are they that ballsy?
No.
Probably. Are they that stupid? Probably not. And that's, I want to actually supplant you with this. It makes no logical sense to use nukes. The problem is it's one of those damn escalation things that we consistently see. If India and China probably go to war, it's not going to start with literally hit the damn button. It's going to be one of these border conflicts that we see fire up every now and again, where one dude goes out to take a piss, and then the other guy on the other side shoots at him because he thinks he's an intruder. And then the whole company engages, and then the division engages, and then you've got yourself a war. That's actually far more likely how this starts.
I actually kind of agree with Tiberius on this one point, which is that like if there was going to be some sort of shooting war between China and India, it would definitely be over how much water is being allowed down the Ganges. Like that's actually like a huge deal.
Almost, aren't they the two most? Don't they use the most water in the world? Like both countries, like one and two.
Well, I mean, they've the
sure
largest
they do.
populations in the world. They really need the resource, and if one side is using their geography to take advantage of, getting more of that resource, then that's going to be a bit of a problem.
almost every like actual like state versus state geopolitical conflict that's currently ongoing is over water, with the exception of maybe Ukraine. But like the rest of them are at least a component of the contention is water.
Oh,
So,
then
and it's
they
gonna
want.
be,
Didn't Russia want a port?
I mean that is yeah, sure. It's but
Yeah, but how is this a thing? Like this is like the kind of shit that makes me like give up on us as a species. Like we're covered 2/3 in fucking water, and
Well,
we have desalinization technology. How the
most-
fuck are we killing
You know,
each other
I'm
over
actually-
water?
Desalinization just isn't that like effective from what I
No,
understand. It's like
you
really,
could-
really expensive.
Nuclear
actually-
desalination works really, really well, and a lot of the water that you're like covers the ground that we can drink, the fresh water, is fracking fluid now. So good luck.
I'm actually really glad,
Mhm.
by the way, that counterpoints you said that specifically in the way you did. Because I was going to actually unload 2 words that will get everybody's eyes rolling here on this topic. Because the first thing that came to my mind when we're going to be talking about whether chemical weapons should be used or not is this thing called the Fermi Paradox. I don't know how many people have heard of this or not.
Oh my god.
Exactly! There
I'm
it is! There's the
excited.
eye roll. Okay,
I'm
cool.
excited.
Okay,
So-
this is gonna be fun. Go
Right.
on.
So the Fermi Paradox is this concept where, like, if aliens exist, we should be aware of them, generally speaking, right? Like radio waves, that type of thing. If sentient life exists in the universe, then we should be able to detect it, right? I like Prime's like just shaking his head, like, wait, what? There's this concept.
I'm channeling.
There's this-
Look, I would say that you're in left field, but you went to orbit, dude. Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I know.
I'm
I know.
okay.
I know
I'm
this
with
is
you.
things in a far, far away
I'm
place.
channeling Doobie right now and thinking, what the fuck is this nerd shit?
Right.
Like,
Now, here we are, ready for it though. There's
I'm
these
ready.
things called great filters that would like theoretically stop a species from progressing to a specific level of advancement, right? So there's this like really scary idea where like if we were to find life, like say on like Titan or Mars or Venus or whatever, right? And life is like that common, then there must be some sort of great filter that exists for life at our technological advancement level that would actually cause us to not make it as a species. So like the question is, would chemical weapons be that like line? Is it the fight for water that's going to be the thing that dooms us as like a species altogether? Is it just, are we just going to obliterate each other, or is it something else?
Yeah, and sorry, Prime. I'm sure you're ready to get back to it, but this is kind of like, for me, that this is it, because we're dealing with like existential crises left, right, and center, and it does seem like we have the technology to be able to manage these crises, but we don't have the understanding or the communication or the ability to break down linguistic barriers or the ability to push past old social constructs or use the old social constructs in a positive way that actually enables us to succeed. And that's part of what I'm worried about, especially when we have all these like prophets of doom on the internet who are just basically like jerking everybody off, like, oh, it's the end of the world, you should just, kill yourself and, just jerk off until you die and, do heroin. The reason why I don't like listening to those fucking people is because it's like we've been in minor apocalypses as a species almost the entirety of our existence. Like, you have to bear in mind, like, we started out as like hairless monkeys running around getting hunted by fucking saber-toothed tigers. Like, there was always a big fucking problem that we had, and we figured it out for the past like 100,000 years. We figured it the fuck out. So there's no reason why we can't figure this out. This one out. The question is just whether or not are we going to.
Well, we have to have the wherewithal, right? Like the thing that's really interesting, like when we look at the crises that we've been dealing with just now, right? Like we have a virus. It's a problem. We need to deal with this virus, and we can't agree on what policies and procedures we should engage in to resolve it. People are getting really, really angry about how to solve this problem. People are willing to fight each other over how we're trying to solve this problem. We can't agree on a solution.
Can I?
And it's like a very
okay,
obvious
really-
problem, right?
Can we
really
can I
quickly-
Yeah.
I just
Oh,
want to
okay.
push back on the paradox thing. It's really silly because you can easily say, yeah, like there's some sort of barrier that makes everybody kill themselves as soon as we're able to like discover life. But it could also be like just as easily that like people, as soon as they have the technology to discover life, they like create the technology to stop themselves from being discovered.
I mean, entirely
That's like
possible.
super
But here,
easy.
I have an educational
Yeah.
video for you in chat. Here you go. I'll put it
Okay,
in.
but
It's a shit
Before
video,
we-
by the way.
Okay,
Connor,
before we move on,
Wait, hold on. Wait, this isn't even nerd. I got to push back on Prime. I wouldn't say this is nerd shit. I actually believe that aliens are real. Okay, that exist. So this.
Okay,
you can look
stop
at the.
derailing.
No,
Go
I'm not
back,
even
Connor.
the Pentagon report on what do they call them? Like
Yeah.
UAPs or some shit.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Really
UFOs.
interesting.
All right.
It is really interesting. Okay, Mad Lad, say your Fermi Paradox was out the window. Fuck you. It's not exactly nerd shit. Okay, the aliens
No,
are already
okay.
here.
It's not
no,
nerd
but
shit.
Fermi-
It's
Get
not,
outta here.
it's
Aliens
not
are right
nerd
here.
shit, and Doobie
I can
likes
connect
it.
those
Just
two
want
ideas
you to
though,
understand
real
that.
quick. Like
Oh.
during the 70s and 80s, there was a bunch of like reports, right, from our nuclear nuclear missile silos, and the guys that guarded them that UFOs were commonly sighted by these guys, and these are guys who are like trained observers who were not like drug tested all the time, and like they're not delusional people, but like there were thousands and thousands. I think it was over 10,000 reports of UFOs, and every time they saw UFOs, the fucking nuclear missiles stopped working. So there's a theory that aliens came to stop us from using nukes once we started using them. Also, Roswell, New Mexico happened right after the first nuclear test.
Wait, hold on. The UAP videos are like recent, like in the last few years. Like
I know, but
Navy pilots see them all the time.
Why are we here?
I can debunk every single one of those.
I don't know.
Actually-
I want to go back
actually
to
think
Connor.
that-
Connor,
hold
can
on.
I do
I
this
want to
real
address what
quick?
you said too. But I was like,
Okay,
can this be the
tell
last
me.
thing?
Bam, I haven't heard you talk a lot. Please go ahead.
My bad. This is the last thing. Like on this before we get like completely away from it. Like I honestly believe that humans, I believe that humans unironically are capable. I don't know. I don't know if humans are capable. If there's things like great things that we're capable of that we like just can't do because we all haven't like got along about it to like make the proper level of investment, or what things we legitimately like if worst came to worst we just like the steps in technology don't exist to figure out. So I'm saying like if all the like fresh water dried up next month, like would humans be able to like strap together, put their minds together and figure out how to solve this freshwater problem for the whole world? And we could have already done it if we would have agreed on it, or will we like lose half the population because it was something that legitimately isn't possible right now? This is always something I question. I feel like the pandemic, Matt tried to say this was a bad example, but I actually think this was a real, like everything's not going to be perfect. I think this was like a really good example of how like something becomes a big enough issue, like we actually are doing, at least as far as producing the vaccine, like in the span of time that was like extremely fast, but based on like the level of priority that
So
we
imagine
decided it was.
so imagine a problem that we don't have a technological solution for, that we can't agree on a solution for. Like the fact that we could do the vaccine as fast as we did is why this is working out okay. If we didn't have the technological capacity to resolve this problem, we'd be fucked. Straight up.
Well,
like,
yeah. So I need my meme.
No, I got to do
No
it.
time,
Shut
man.
up.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to get in on this. Bam, I was actually going to take the exact opposite point. I think COVID has shown exactly how stupid humans can get over even some of the most basic shit. And this is just a hard rebuttal to Connor. Yeah, I believe people are stupid enough that in the event they can absolutely throw nuclear weapons at each other if shit goes to hay.
Okay, but I want to agree with Bam because basically I hope that instinctively we can get our shit together in broad strokes. You're not going to save everybody, right? Broad strokes. I think we've done an okay job with this crisis, especially while maintaining some level of like liberty for people to be stupid as fuck. Like freedom doesn't just mean the freedom to do the cool shit. Freedom means the freedom to do the dumb shit too. So that's like the double-edged sword of freedom. And then when it comes to the negativity, my main point was going to be like, this is why I want like anarchities and like anarchists and like raw direct democracy fucking Democrats. I want them to reckon themselves with the fact that if like democracy was in charge of like global warming or the pandemic or nuclear weapons or sarin gas, Doobie gets as much of a vote as you, and there's probably way more Doobies than you want to fucking think there are. So
there's no faster way to cure global warming than nuclear winter. Okay,
you're not wrong.
That's right.
Did we kill this topic? Are we dead now?
Yeah.
Use the chemicals.
No, actually, I think I don't know. So all these this moral grandstanding you guys are doing about chemical weapons, we're like, Like,
Moral
I'm-
grandstanding.
yeah,
It's
moral
practical
grandstanding.
application, homie.
Moral grandstanding, yes.
Moral grandstand.
Your
So
lack of practical
curious
application.
no, I think there's plenty of practical. We found over the practical application.
Yeah, and you were wrong.
You can say that drones aren't that useful, right? That hey, those things are.
No, I didn't say that. I said chemical weapons specifically.
Yeah, well, hold on, but I'm saying you can make an argument that they're not that useful, and that they kill more people, more civilians than they're worth. Right. So what I'm wondering, now is like, are there any other weapons of war that you would want to outlaw, like drones?
Landmines.
What about like mines? Yeah.
Lands.
Fist fights.
Smart
That's
minds, I
how
think.
real men do it. We just go out to a
Yeah,
middle of
smart
field.
missiles.
shoot stuff.
I mean, we're gonna have robots that can march into battle.
Why shouldn't we outlaw the robots?
I mean,
Well,
maybe. I don't know.
robots are-
No, I
Depends on
want,
the-
I want my Gundams. Bring me the Gundams.
We want
No,
we
but
want to be able
hey,
to deploy
that'll
robots
take out
to
that'll
fight.
remove the human consequence of going to war. So why
That's right,
should we
it's
allow
chemical
that? That'll
That's
cause more
actually
war.
kind of terrifying, isn't it? Like, what if there were no human consequences for going to war? Then we
Well,
could
There
like
always
have.
will be human
What
consequences.
we could do actually,
Why?
going back into space, I want to go back to orbit real quick. We could actually have robotic warfare on the moon exclusively to resolve conflicts.
Well,
Oh my God, that would be really
but
cool.
It would be really cool, right?
I
Like,
mean,
come
that's
on,
like
let's do it.
possible, right?
That-
Like, let's say we're like
BattleBots-
warring over resources on the moon, right? Like theoretically,
Oh,
like then we could
shit.
send drones to the moon, and like
Yeah.
the war would be waged there.
Oh my god! Is anybody remembering like the BattleBots TV show where like engineers like build like? All right. So, anyways, that was enough of a fucking tangent. No, but this actually, as somebody who gets on my soapbox about like guns and balance of power between politicians and civilians and like all that kind of shit, I do think about that in reference to war robotics, like the Boston Dynamics, the dog, and the humanoid one. I do think about that in reference to like the sword missile and all that kind of stuff. Because if you have a missile that is accurate enough that you can take out one specific person and no collateral damage, the moral objections to that assassination probably plummet. And then also when it comes to like war robotics, not only can they be armored more than a soldier or a Marine, but then on top of that, they can go into the danger area first, and they can take out people who are not similarly technologically equipped, probably on a factor of like dozens to one. And you're not losing a human being, you're losing a robot, and robots can be repaired.
Right.
So this creates like a new asymmetry in warfare, where the people who do have drones, like for instance, like I think there was a drone swarm that actually like took out an oil field in like Syria or some shit.
Saudi Arabia.
This does mean that the people who have who invest in war robotics have an asymmetrical advantage over the people who use traditional troops, and it's a game changer that I don't even think we've wrapped our head around yet.
I mean, similar to tanks.
But
regardless.
at the end of the day, that's like every technical advancement ever, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no,
and
no,
eventually,
no.
like,
Just
eventually, you leave some behind in the field, and they slap some shits together, and they have their own robot fight
Yeah.
your robots, right?
Well,
And
no,
then
because no, that's not true though. Because like the thing is, like we're getting to a point where like the technology required to get the advancement is going to be harder and harder to produce for like countries that are weaker and weaker. There's a reason why nuclear weapons have been like the game changer that created peace of the world, is because other countries are having a hard time producing it. And yeah, we're trying to keep other countries from doing it and suppressing them, et cetera, but it's actually a really big advancement and a very challenging thing to do. So like the idea of like battle bots is going to be a thing where like some big countries will be able to do it. The small countries are not going to be able to do it. They're not going to be able to replicate the level of technology or
We
armor or
plant
whatever.
battle bots in the field.
I got two
and
things
then
here. Now,
they
number
take them
one-
home and they slaughter entire bases of people.
No, two things here. Number one, literally what Connor's talking about battle bots is the exact same thing that we had to do with tanks. Is that you increase the technological sophistication? It can literally 1v100 an entire infantry
Yep.
battalion. Yes, but eventually somebody just builds
Counters.
their own tanks. Now, yeah, Panzers, all that shit. So
And
I
I
don't
mean,
need to-
like, let's
don't
be
need to do that.
clear.
Yeah.
Like Poland, 1939, tried the whole cavalry charge against the tank, right? Like,
it doesn't work out very well.
right, it didn't work out very
all right,
well. So,
so
like, small countries couldn't do it.
And then they
I
put a
do want
screen
to
door on a submarine.
rebuttal Mad Lad just a little bit here. I think a lot of countries could have nukes if they wanted them. The largely is that usually, but if you basically think about it in the terms of like NATO and the alliance structures that we have, is that you've got somebody with nukes who are backing you. But one of the things I'm concerned about that I was talking about is as the Americans leave the world order, you're going to see a lot of people join the nuclear club very quickly if they have to take it into their own hands. Poland's definitely going to get them. Sweden's definitely going to get them. Japan's definitely going to get them, and South Korea will too. I wouldn't be surprised if Taiwan jumps that ship.
But
I kind of agree, actually. That's a fair point. Like, I could actually see a lot of our our state allies actually developing nukes on their own once like American
But
dominance kind of subsides.
I don't think it's ever going to be that far. I think we're going to we're going to recede, but we're never going to pull away completely. Like I think like isolationist Trumpism or whatever, it's going to become like self-evidently stupid. And if not, then again, my faith in humanity plummets. But what I did want to point out though, when it came to like war robots or whatever, very specifically, part of the complication of like the Saudi Arabian incident where like an oil field was attacked by a swarm, was you had some level of deniability. Because basically, like, you can't say exactly who did it unless it says, like, made in the USA stamped on the fucking drone swarm. And particularly if it has, like, an explosive payload or something like that, you have some level of deniability. And then if you do, like, low tech, so for instance, like this happened in the war in Syria, they rigged normal $500 Target and Costco drones with fucking like IEDs and shit, flew them on top of tanks and then set off explosives like on top of the tanks and shit. Like, I don't know how effective it is. But the point is that like this some of this technology can be hyper accelerated to the point that there's no competitors. And then some of this technology is available at your local Target right now. So that's kind of where the game has changed. And unfortunately, I'm a fucking boomer in this realm.
I feel like it's interesting that this conversation is unironically became the plot of Attack on Titan. Like legit, like we're like,
if you never watched the manga or the anime or read the manga, don't spoil anything for me. I might watch it one day.
Damn, dude,
that is not fair. You're like a decade behind. Okay.
True.
That's fine.
The Titans.
Actually, that reminds me.
I don't know.
While we're on the anime tangent for just 1 second,
Oh, come on.
I wanted to. No, this is for you, Prime. I wanted to congratulate you.
Oh no!
Apparently, the last 2 episodes of your favorite show were amazing.
Weebs.
Okay. Anyway, I want to rebuttal Connor real quick, if I may. I don't want to be doomer as fuck here, but one of the big things that I want to put is the historical precedent. And you're a history nerd, Connor. Most of the time in American history, the United States has chosen to be isolationist. And the only reason I think that we didn't do that after World War II is that we literally went through this bloody conflict, fought in 2 entire different theaters. And then the moment we were done, we looked across the board and we're like, oh, wait, there's somebody even worse or as worse as the people we just beat. Oh, shit. And
yeah, but
I think that was the thing, is that I think the Cold War was an anomaly. And going forward, I've seen this since 1991. The Americans slowly, bit by bit, are literally tearing apart the world order they built.
But this is my counterpoint. So I don't see the United States as like I know you might see the wave of like isolationism war. But what I see is consolidation of power over time. That's what I see. And I see it as kind of like a growth, like a concentric growth of imperial American power over time. We said that we wanted to be isolationists and not have a standing army. Well, guess what? The Native Americans, we used that as an excuse to constantly invade West. We did the same thing with Mexico. We did the same thing with the Banana Wars. We did the same thing with the Mediterranean and the Barbary pirates. We did the same thing. And then like World War I, World War II, we pretended that we wanted to be isolationist. But let's be real here. Not everybody wanted to be isolationist. And as soon as we did that, we were basically involved in Europe's bullshit. So while individual day-to-day American citizens might not be want to be involved on the world stage, American capitalists and American corporatists absolutely do want to be involved on the world stage because it gives them more markets to participate in, and that gives the United States military the pretext to protect global markets. So while I do see like United States global corporate hegemony receding from an increasingly like dominant China, I don't see it being like, oh, fuck getting bananas from South America, fuck getting microprocessors from Taiwan, fuck getting oil from the Middle East. We're just going to back off on everything. I don't think that's going to happen.
I kind of know.
Okay. You can respond, but I do want to move on.
Okay. I mean, I just wanted to say real quick regarding there being an even worse actor, and that's why people would compete or whatnot. It was actually I feel like it was more like a 1984 situation where you had the main powers counterbalancing each other. So every time they allied up and won a war, their latest ally would become their latest rival, right? It was like a continuous cycle of rivalries, and it was like a continuation of just trying to create this balance. more than, oh, hey, this person's way more fucking evil. The whole way more fucking evil thing, it was only like a recent development. We're talking like 1880s when Germany was founded in like the Palace of Versailles. The French really, really fucking hated that. And then World War I, and then World War II. And then we had like what we have now with between the United States and the Soviet Union. Like we're in uncharted waters, but I don't want to have the situation where we're taught like pretending that history was good versus evil like continuously. I don't think that's what it was.
Okay. My reply to Connor is part one. You hit actually some of my own rebuttals, which is hilarious. The shortages are definitely causing heaves within the community or with the corporate community because when they love trading with China and India because it's cheap as fuck, and they can make record profits. But on the other side of that is that if you can't get shit to market, then you're kind of screwed. And that's one of the things that we've have had to deal with in the COVID era. That's why your prices on everything's been shooting up to the roof lately. The other part, monopoly of power. This is actually the thing I really want to tag into. I think you're right to a large degree, but here's the counter thesis to this. The Americans have largely been an indirect ruler during the imperial era, is that they would come in, but they would largely set up a puppet government or a side government to do their bidding for them. And I think that we've done that for a very long time. But one of the things that allows us to do that no other empire usually will have done is that we didn't take it directly. And so we can walk away at any given point if we decide to do so. We've done it before. It's been rare, but we've done it, particularly with Cuba. Going on to the final note I want to get to you is that here's the problem with the world coming up. A lot of the way that we think the world works isn't going to be the same. Europe is turning into an old folks home. They have nobody to buy the products. They're literally going to be a bunch of retirees. East Asia is competing with us on every single front. So either you have Japan, which has more people retired than not, or you have China, which is building all your shit. So you don't want to be on the same economic game as them anyway. India is an interesting partner, but most of the world now is diametrically opposed to U.S. political, economic, and geopolitical interest.